As Dr. Milinda Banerjee is lecturer in modern history at the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, United Kingdom. He specializes in history of modern political thought and political theory, and is the program director for the MLit in Global Culture and Political. As a brief biodata goes, it appears that he dons many hats. There are many titles and many honors to his credit. And it's a very good thing that one of our faculty members, Dr. Priyanka Jha, knows him personally. So I welcome him with all, on behalf of all my students and my faculty members. And I would like Professor Priyanka Jha to give us a glimpse of her own association with Dr. Milinda and how she knows him as a very good scholar. So over to Dr. Priyanka Jha.
Thank you so much, ma'am. At the onset of this lecture, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Milinda Banerjee, who I share academic fraternity with. I would request everyone to kindly mute themselves. Saptik Sanyal ji, please mute kar le apne aap ko. Ji, thank you. So it was very interesting that I'd met Dr. Banerjee in a conference that was organized by University College London, where we both were talking about intellectual history from the margins, political thought from the margins. And it is in that light that we share a lot of argument, we share a lot of common ground. And this is the brilliant opportunity that I want to share with everyone, that Dr. Banerjee has been instrumental in terms of... Deshani, can you... Yeah. So, you know, our projects of decolonizing the canon, decolonizing the way in which intellectual history of ideas have been framed, and how the kind of attention that needs to be given to post-colonial society has been significant in Dr. Milinda's work. And also I want to bring to attention here to the audience that Dr. Banerjee has been working on this for a really long time, for more than a decade, whereby he's trying to democratize the way we do something called history of political thought and intellectual history of ideas. And, you know, in the larger context of his lecture today, which is titled as Against the Capitalocene, from Subaltern Community to Multi-Species Democracy, is a very important and significant intervention in which we do theory, in which we look at categories and concepts like justice and democracy, and the need to really move not just towards margin, but inverting what is considered as center and the periphery. So in that larger pursuit, this is a brilliant, and this is part of the larger text that Dr. Banerjee has just come out with, which is Subaltern Studies 2.0, in which the...
Very much, Dr. Jha, for this very warm invitation. It is an absolute honor for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously the history of Banaras University, I mean, it's one of the most important universities in India, in Asia. And Kashi, as we Bengalis call it, Varanasi is a place very dear to my heart. I was first there when I was 4 years old. I was last there before COVID. I've repeatedly visited it. So we have really a very strong personal connection with the town. I mean, whenever I'm there, I feel really inspired, like many other Bengalis have, historically speaking. So it's a real honor to be able to talk here. Being a Bengali, as you perhaps know, all the stereotypes are true. If I speak Hindi, I will make grammatical mistakes. Therefore, I will try to speak in English. I read Hindi and I do speak in Hindi. I mean, I can communicate in Hindi. So, agar aapko sawal puchna hai Hindi mein, so please do so. I will try to answer in a mix of Hindi and English. And I will try to explain some of the terms, at least in Hindi. And if I make mistakes, which I will, you know, extend your loving forgiveness to me. So it's a great honor to be here. As Dr. Jha was mentioning, our first interactions go to this conference in London, and I was really moved by Dr. Jha's own work on what we might definitely call intellectual history from below, and looking at expanding the basis of intellectual history beyond great men, whether those be European great men or whether they be Indian great men. I mean, we need to think beyond the canon. I think what I'm going to present today hopefully expands that conversation. And as part of that, I'm really interested also in collaborative work with your university, because I think it's universities in these non-capital cities, for want of a better word, where much of the most interesting work is being done, but it does not always receive the global visibility that more canonical universities do. And we need to do collaborative work here. So my talk will take about an hour, perhaps, slightly less or slightly more, and then we can have the Q&A. So as you can see, and please don't hesitate to interrupt me if you think that either the PowerPoint is not working, or you feel that I'm speaking too fast, or I need to just break down and go a bit slow and explain a bit more in Hindi and so on. So my talk today is called Against the Capitalocene, from Subaltern Community to Multispecies Democracy, which sounds a very heavy title, but I hope that it's not as heavy as it sounds. So what does Capitalocene mean? Capitalocene, it basically means the age of capital. And why do we use the term? So what is capital? In Hindi, we can say Pujivad, capitalism, Pujivad ya Dhantantra. So Capitalocene, we might say, jis yug mein Pujivad ya Dhantantra samrat hai, sarvabhauma hai. So why is it important to talk about capitalism now? Now, one of the main reasons is the problem of global warming, the climate crisis. Even in Europe, which is not normally known for its very hot summers, this summer there has been wildfires, there have been deaths from the global warming, from heat. It has been a time of very unusual weather conditions. Of course, in countries like India or Africa, we face the situation of global warming much more strongly. And global warming is not something that is natural. It has been created by humanity. And then the question arises also not just of global warming, but if you think of environmental pollution, dushan, and other things. A lot of these things, also, for example, mass extinction. At the moment, we are living in the age of sixth mass extinction, when hundreds of species are just becoming extinct. So it's a time of great disaster. It's a time of crisis. Now, the question arises, who created this crisis? Now, one group of scholars, they say that it's the Anthropocene, meaning anthropos is the Greek word for man. It's man, humanity, which has created this crisis, because humans have interfered with the planet. They hunt, they fish, they spread their cities and industries everywhere. And that is what causes the climate crisis. That is what causes the death and destruction of many species. But then, of course, the question arises, is it really humanity as an abstraction? Is it the villagers in Bhojpur or in Bengal, or the indigenous population of Australia, or the New Zealand, or the indigenous people of South America, whom in India we would call the Janjati? Have they created this crisis? And the answer is obviously no. They have lived for thousands of years without creating the crisis. And that's why many historians today rather say that it is not humanity, Manushatya, in the abstract, which has created the crisis. It is a specific segment of humankind. And that is the segment which is responsible for the crisis, and that is capitalist humanity, the Pujivadi part of humanity. So why capitalism? And from when do we date this crisis? From when did this problem of global warming, the mass destruction of non-human populations, environmental pollution, from when did it reach a critical stage? And what can we do to overcome this crisis? And there I want to talk about two scholars who have created two different perspectives. One is Andreas Malm. His most famous book is The Fossil Capital. And he dates the crisis roughly to the late 18th, early 19th century. So the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And it is because of Industrial Revolution, the spread of factories, etc., that the industrialization of the world has happened. which has ultimately resulted in this climate crisis. So behind global warming, there is a history of industrial revolution, but not just of industrial revolution, also of imperialism, Samrajyavad. So Samrajyavad, imperialism, capitalism, Pujivad, these are responsible for the climate crisis. Why? Because if we look, for example, in the history of India, it's places in Western Bengal, in Jharkhand, from where coal was mined, and coal was massively responsible for global warming. And this was, of course, mined by the British Raj. Then in the 20th century, you have American interventions in the Middle East and the whole use of oil as well to fuel the fossil industry, the fossil capital industry, cars, etc., all need oil. So coal and oil both are products of capitalism, but also specifically of colonial capitalism, Pujivadi Samrajyavad. Particularly the British, the American interventions are very crucial here. And it is because of the burning of fossil fuel that we have the present crisis. A more longer term history has been offered by Jason Moore, who argues that it's not really only from the late 18th, early 19th century that the crisis began. The crisis has older origins, particularly in the 16th century. Now, why is 16th century important? You all know about Vasco da Gama, you know about Columbus, the whole discovery of the Americas, etc. The beginnings of the global empire of European states, whether they be the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the British, this starts off from the 16th century. And it's from the 16th century that the planetary crisis starts becoming precipitated by capitalism. And capitalism leads to the destruction of vast parts of humanity. Think about the fate of the indigenous populations of North and South America, of Australia, of New Zealand. It results in large-scale mining, devastation of native ecosystems, and ultimately, of course, in global warming. Now, the question then arises, we have a crisis. What is the solution? So, and I will discuss here two perspectives. Andreas Malm, in his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, as well as in other works of his, argues that a large part of the solution might lie in civil society activism. So human beings, activists, they have to go and they have to actively sabotage the infrastructure of fossil capital, blow up pipelines. So where there are oil pipelines or the infrastructure of the coal mining, etc., they need to do activism to destroy that infrastructure. Now, the problem with this perspective, however, is that it depends too much on individual voluntary activity. Now, individual voluntary activity can often be very helpful. Think about Indian nationalists' fight against the British Empire. During the Swadeshi period, individual burning of clothes during Swadeshi, etc., were important. But at the end, I mean, without a mass solution, such individual activism, especially when they're limited to middle classes, it might not always be successful. Another solution is offered by Thomas Piketty. He's a very famous economist. He writes that the solution really lies in welfare state activities. So the state has to be more interventionist. For example, it should tax carbon, those who commit who leave the largest carbon footprint. For example, you think about all the rich people who fly all the time in aeroplanes. So air travel should be taxed. The fossil industry should be taxed. And the money that the state gets through these taxes, it should be redistributed to the poor people. So this is a more statist way of thinking about how to solve the environmental crisis. But this also has problems because any state, whether in Asia or Europe or America, often works in alliance with the capitalist class. There is a relation between the state and the Pujivadi class. So how much the state will actively really intervene to change the environmental situation is something that can be questioned. And historically speaking, international action for the benefit of the environment has not always been extremely successful. Another way of thinking is offered by the perspective of degrowth. Now, in India, as well as in many other societies across the world, growth is often seen as important. The term for development, vikas. So development, growth, these are seen as important because they're seen as development of the economy, giving more people jobs and so on. But of course, any kind of development, vikas, comes with a cost. And the cost is often to the environment, the cost is often to local communities, to local populations, to the Janjati. So many scholars today are talking about degrowth. And degrowth implies that you have to emphasize other things, social justice, environmental justice, beyond growth. In fact, there should be a kind of reduction of economic growth, because economic growth is ultimately injurious for the planet as a whole. But then, of course, the debate arises, what about poor countries like India or in Africa? Should they be the ones pursuing degrowth, or should the Western countries who have historically benefited from imperialism, should the Western countries, and particularly their elites, their capitalist classes, who should be the ones pursuing degrowth? So that's another important question. Now, what all of these debates have made very kind of sort of important in the social imagination is a very ancient philosophical question in a way, the question of being. What is being? So if you think about the Upanishads, the question of Sat, of being, is very important. But in a lot of current politics as well, the question of being, of Sat, has again become very important, because the question arises, should we only care for politics that benefits human beings, or should we also think about non-human beings? Now, the picture on the left is of a beautiful river, the Wanganui River, a Nadi in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the local Maori population, many of them consider this river to be their ancestor, their purvaj. I mean, this is something that we Indians can perhaps very easily understand, where we think of rivers as gods, devis, and so on. So it's similar in New Zealand. And therefore, for many Maori people, protecting the river is inseparable from protecting the human indigenous Maori communities. And the New Zealand government did, in the last few years, give legal recognition to this belief. So they said that the Wanganui River, from its origins to its mouth, from its source to its mouth, is a being whose rights need to be protected. And the beingness, the sattva of the river, and the sattva, the beingness of the people who live there, it's inseparable, because the people believe the river to be an ancestor, a god, a purvaj, a devata. So, and the same kind of legal recognition and legal protection has also been extended to other landscapes as well in New Zealand. And that then raises the question about the rights of the Mother Earth. So not just human rights, Manavadhikar, but the rights of Dharti Mata, of Mother Earth. And this is something where South America has played a very important role. So in India, in various languages, we speak about Prithvi Ma, Dharti Mata, etc. In the South American indigenous languages, a very important concept today is that of Pachamama, the Mother Earth. And then especially in Ecuador, in Bolivia, people have agitated about protecting the rights of Mother Earth. And with the Mother Earth herself is, of course, a being. She herself is a Sat. And her beingness, her Sattva, comprises also the beings of all the indigenous populations there who have historically suffered a lot from white settler colonialism. So protecting the earth, protecting the indigenous subaltern, Nimnavargiya communities, these things are inseparable. And in the legislation that has been passed in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Mother Earth, people are emphasizing that we need to think in this kind of a holistic way. Now, when we are talking then about non-human beings, that raises the question, actually, how do we think about non-human beings? And anthropologists have been playing a very important role in recognizing the fact that a lot of societies across the world don't only emphasize the beingness of humans, but also the beingness of non-humans. And again, this is something very familiar to us. Think about Kalidasa. the beginning of one of his great poems begin, Astattarasyang Dishi Devat Himalaya Nam Devatatma Himalaya Name Nagadhi Raja. So we think of the Himalaya as a being, as a Devatatma. He has the soul of a god. It's quite similar in South America, in the Andes. And Marisol de la Cadena, who's a Peruvian anthropologist, she speaks about how the mountains in the Andes are thought of as Tirakuna, as earth beings, and recognized as beings, as living spirits by the local people. And this means that the local politics, the indigenous politics against white settler colonialism, against white settler capitalism, Shwetanga Pujivad, is a politics of recognizing the beingness that links the mountains and the local human beings. Another way of thinking about this is through the perspective of multi-species ethnography. Now, I'll make a very bad mistake, I'm sure, in translating Hindi, but ethnography, traditionally it has been translated often as anthropology, as Dritvatva, but this is multi-species, so Bahuprajati. So it's an ethnography of different species. And Van Duren's famous work is on crows. And he shows, again, on the crows, Kawa. So he shows how the crows also have concepts of friendship. They can distinguish between individual crows and individual humans. They give each other gifts, upahar dete hain. They use fire, they use tools, things which we think of as very human. Actually, crows also have it. And I will speak in a moment that there has been a lot of fantastic scholarship on how non-human animals behave. They also have their democratic politics, their Gantantra and Prajatantra. They also have their various sophisticated forms of social and political organization. So in order to understand how non-human beings function, we have to understand also their biological, their social behavior. And that then leads me then to the book that a very close friend of mine, Jelle Butters, he is a Dutch anthropologist based in Bhutan, and I have written. Jelle's original work was on Nagaland. He did his PhD from Nehu, but then he's now based in Bhutan at the Royal Thimphu College. And he and I, we have written this book called Subaltern Studies 2.0. And we are very lucky that we got 4 fantastic commentaries from Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, from Marisol de la Cadena, from Tom Van Duren, and from Suraj Yengre. We are very lucky, they wrote fantastic commentaries. So if you're familiar broadly with the history of subaltern studies, the subaltern studies was a group of mainly Indian scholars, Ranajit Guho, Partha Chatterjee, Dipesh Chakraborty, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, and others, who emphasized that history has hitherto been written from the perspective of the elites, the Ucha Varg. But we need to understand history and society and political consciousness from the perspectives of the subalterns, the Nimna Varg, the lower caste, the tribal populations, and so on, and of course, women. But subaltern studies in its original version focused on humans mostly, and they focused on local communities which fought against the British Raj, British Samrajya ke, against those who fought. We are talking about a new subaltern studies, a subaltern studies 2.0, which also emphasizes something that we all know, that human beings are also linked with non-human beings. And we need to think about this in a global way, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. All the world is a kin, a family. So we need to think about the kinship between humans and non-humans, and we need to think how we can together fight against neo-colonial state and capitalism. Naya Aupanideshikvad, Naya Pujivad, Naya Samrajyavad, how can we fight against the global power of companies and of states that support those companies, how we can fight, and especially from the perspective of the global South, from the perspective of Asians and Africans and indigenous peoples all around the world. And that's what this book is about. And today my talk will largely derive from the collective work that Jelle and I have been doing. Now, in order to kind of focus on that, let's first think with something that perhaps might come as a bit of a surprise, animal democracy. Pashu Prajatantra, or in Bengali, we would say perhaps Pashu Ganatantra. So animal republicanism, animal democracy. Now, why is this important? And my basic argument would be that the first act of colonialism, of Samrajyavad, that humans did was on animals. Humans first colonized animals. And if we study the human colonization of the animal world, we will better understand a lot of things, how state operates, how capitalism operates, and so on. Now, that begs the question, which perhaps many of you will be thinking, what do I mean by capitalism? What do I mean by Pujivad? Now, I have a very simple definition, which largely draws upon things that scholars have talked about before, especially critical kind of Marxian positions. Capitalism is about the commodification of beings. Capitalism is when we treat other beings, whether they be human beings or non-human beings, whether they be humans or animals or forests or lakes or mountains, not as beings, definitely not as gods, but as commodities, as panya, as things that you can buy and sell in the market. That for me is the basic fundament of capitalism. Now, does this mean capitalism also existed in the ancient world? Yes, for sure, in its roots, because in many ancient societies as well, you do have trade and commerce and all of that. But as people like Andreas Malm and Jason Moore have shown, it's really from the 16th century, particularly with the European colonization of the world, that capitalism becomes the general social form gradually. It has still not become entirely true. We still indulge in friendship and family relations, which are beyond the operation of commodity relations. We don't always think about whom we are going to buy and sell with. We also often just do things out of love and respect and all of that. But it has become the central form of social economic relations today in a way which was perhaps not the case 3,000 years ago. Now, so that in a way is the soul of capitalism, Pujivad ki Atma. But what supports it, what gives it the muscle, is also state power. Because states also support capitalism. States support merchants, and any state needs taxes. And that's what three of my friends, Ilya Afanasiev, Lorenzo Bondioli, and Nicolas Mathieu have been working on. Basically, their argument goes that going back to the most ancient monarchic societies, Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then through the Middle Ages until our period, we can say that state power and capitalism have fed each other because states need to extract value. They need mulya, financial value, especially arthik mulya. And that encourages the commercialization of societies, that encourages commerce, trade, pujivad, etc. Now, my point here is that at the heart of this commodification, that you think of another being, another soul, not as a soul, not as a being, but as a commodity. At the heart of this is a tremendous violence. And the first major people on whom this violence was practiced were animals. Now, what is my evidence? My evidence really comes from, to a large extent, from ancient Indian texts, which tell us enormously about both the colonization of the animal world, as well as, fascinatingly, about resistance to this colonization. So, if you look at, for example, the Rig Veda or the Shatapatha Brahmana, etc., you find actual evidence of places where the gods and the humans are trying to domesticate the animals, and the animals are resisting. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, for example, there's a very famous passage where the animals don't want to be domesticated, and then the gods, by using various things, using both kind of a mix of punishment and reward, they succeed in domesticating animals. Or you think about the very, very famous passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says that the gods treat humans as the humans treat animals. They want to, the pashu, they want to domesticate them. But the way you can escape this domestication is when you realize that actually you are the same as the gods, you are the same as every other being. And it is through this kind of identification with others that you transcend this form of domestication, this form of subjugation. Ancient Indian texts also give us evidence about animal politics and animal democracy. Any of you who have read, and I'm sure many of you have read, the Panchatantra, the Jataka, the Kathasarit the Hitopadesha, all of these texts are full of animals. Now, today, as modern people influenced by kind of Western education, we think, these texts are just ancient fable. They are putting words into animals. But I would finally argue that that's not true. Animals do engage in democratic politics. And in however complex and refracted a way, these ancient texts do give us evidence that ancient humans or humans traditionally did recognize animal politics and among humans. It's just that they sometimes use that to also subjugate the animals. So in Kautilya's Arthashastra, for example, you have detailed description about animal politics, about the yutha, the collective, and then how those who have been expelled from the yutha, the niryutha, who have been expelled from the herd, they are more easy to capture. I will, in a later part of my talk, also discuss in detail Greek and Roman sources. Plato, Aristotle, Virgil, they all give us fantastic examples of human observance of animal politics, as well as of human colonization of the animal world. Now, my final argument here would be that these animal democracy models were actually used in the late 19th, early 20th century to speak against the British Empire. Because what did the British say? They said that Indians or Oriental peoples, they don't have democracy. They're used to Oriental despotism, they're used to monarchy, and that's why we British can do whatever we want. But what did the Indian say, or many of the Indian intellectuals say? They said, actually, democracy is not something that is specific to Europe. You have it not just among other human beings. Think about K.P. Jaiswal's work. He gives detailed discussions on ancient Indian democracies, but you even have it among animals. So Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, in a beautiful text, it's called Hanumat Babu Sangbad, Hanumat Babu Sangbad. So it's a Sangbad, a dialogue between Hanuman and a Babu, a Western educated Bengali. So Hanuman, you all know him, Rama's disciple, Hanumanji. He says that actually it's not the Western educated Indian elites who have true democracy, it's animals who have true democracy. And of course, especially monkeys do. Similarly, Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhuri is another very famous writer. He writes this fantastic text where he discusses, sorry, I just should use, yeah, you can see the slide. Just one question, maybe to Dr. Jha. Can you see my slides? Because on my computer, I seem to be seeing some weird color schemes on the slide, but can you see the slides clearly?
Yes, yes, I can see the slide, and there are these colorful lines which are coming.
They should not be there. Maybe what I'll try to do is I will stop sharing and then I will try to come back to screen share. Maybe that makes it a bit better because they were not in the original PowerPoint. Yes, now they're gone. Brilliant. So you can see that lovely cat there. I'm sure many of you people love cats. So this is a cat called Majantali Sarkar. So Sarkar means obviously government. So this is a cat who thinks I should act like a state. I should act like the Sarkar and take taxes from the animals. He has a very bad fate. At the end, an elephant crushes his belly and he dies. So this shows that when humans try to colonize, or when animals try to colonize each other, it does not always lead to a good fate. Now, and finally, my last example is from a fantastic book called The Chief of the Herd. Its Bengali translation is Yuthapati, which is about elephants. And this book, written by Dhanagopal Mukherjee, who was an Indian, a Bengali, but expatriate in America, he wrote this book in order to argue that elephants have democracy. Elephants elect their leaders and so on. So these are all fantastic, and he was an Indian nationalist. He wanted to free India from British rule. So what all of these examples show is that Indians drew upon their indigenous traditions of reflecting on animal politics, on animal democracy, which go back to the Panchatantra, the Jataka, and so on, in order to challenge the British Empire. And all of this shows how Indians have recognized, like many non-Western peoples, the beingness of the non-human and how it has been central to their politics. Now, I will come now to some specific case studies that come directly from my own previous years of research. So the parts I'll be talking about of India and South Asia that I'll be talking about, many of you will be familiar with it. I'll talk about Northern Bengal, which borders Nepal and Bhutan. I will talk about Bhutan. I will talk about the state of Tripura in Northeastern India. I will talk about the Sundarbans, which is a beautiful forest. If any of you have been to the Sagar Mela, that's the region where Sundarbans is. I'll talk about Rar, which is southwestern Bengal, the part which borders Jharkhand, and Orissa. So those are the parts that are so roughly eastern and northeastern India. So my first example comes from the Chandi Mongol. The Chandi Mongol is a Mongol Kavya written to the goddess Chandi. You all know the goddess. She's also known as Durga and Bhavani and so on. So Chandi Mongol is a tradition of texts written about her. And these texts in Bengal were largely written between the 16th and 18th century. And the most famous writer of the Chandi Mongol was a person called Mukundo, who lived in the late 16th, early 17th century. And Mukunda is amazing because he's basically talking about animal politics as well as about lower caste tribal politics. But I will concentrate here on the animal politics bit. Where the animals live and they're always full of fear. Shodai Shashanko. You will understand the Hindi, Sashanka. They're always full of Shanka, of fear. And they want to be Niratanka. They want to be without fear. So who do they pray to? They pray to the goddess Chandi, because Chandi is also called Abhaya, she who removes fear. And the goddess comes and institutes a polity among them. So in that polity, the lion is the king, the tiger is this, the elephant is this, etc. So you see a fascinating example of animal constitutionalism. And the goddess Chandi herself is, of course, in the text, and more broadly, she often takes animal forms. She takes the form of the bird kite, she takes the form of a godha, she takes lots of different animal forms. So she herself is a forest goddess. Now, but then the problem arises when a hunter starts killing some of the animals. And then it's very interesting, the animals go and petition the goddess for help again. So it's again an example of animal collective politics. And here you see in this famous painting by Abanindranath Tagore, you see the four animal wives, the animal women. So there is the tigress, the lioness, the elephantess, and the deeress. I hope those words exist. The Bhagini, the Singhini, the Karini, and the Harini, who go to the goddess and petition her for protection. So a fantastic example about how humans in pre-modern India, particularly pre-modern Eastern India, thought about animal protection. They thought about ahimsa as a virtue. Another term that comes up in the text is avirodha, non-conflict. So the goddess wants to prevent conflict. She wants to prevent violence in the forest. She wants to prevent violence amongst animals and towards animals. Another very interesting example of animal politics comes from the Sundarbans. Sorry, another question to Dr. Jha. When I'm seeing the PowerPoint, because I can also see you, so part of the PowerPoint is clouded to me. But can you see the whole slide as a whole? You can see the whole slide, fantastic. So you can also see all the images and so on, fantastic. So this is a set of texts called the Rai Mongol, which were written about Dakshin Rai. He's the main tiger god of the Sundarbans, which is a huge deltaic forest across today's southern Bengal and Bangladesh. And there it's another very interesting story about animal constitutionalism. When we think about constitutionalism, sang vidhanikata, we think today about humans, but traditionally Indians also thought about animals as being constitutional in nature. So what is the problem? The problem is that during the 17th, 18th century, Bengal and Eastern India more broadly were part of a growing early modern Adi Adhunik world of commercialization, of trade, etc. And you had a lot of Europeans coming in as well. The Portuguese and so on, in Bengali, they're called Firingi. In Hindi, I know the word is Firang. So they're coming in. So people are moving into the forest, and there are therefore conflicts between humans and the animals. And particularly what the Rai Mongol tradition talks about is a conflict between humans and tigers. So the humans cut down a tree which is sacred to the tiger god. What does the tiger god do? He sends some tigers. All the tigers have names there. They're men tigers, female tigers, all of them have names. They go and start eating the humans. And then a conflict arises between Barakan Ghazi, who is an Islamic peer. He's a protector of the humans, and broadly represents kind of the human settlement, etc., and the tiger god. But ultimately the conflict is resolved and the two become best friends. So, and there are two terms which are used in these texts to talk about the pact that happens between Barakan Ghazi and Dakshin Rai, or more broadly, between humans and tigers, between Muslims and Hindus, for a kind of harmonious coexistence. One term that is used is Maitra. It's from the Sanskrit Mitra or Maitri, which means friend, friendship. You're all aware of the term. This is one word that is used. Another word which is used is dostani, from the Persian word dost, friend. So this shows that a kind of constitutionalism develops a relation of friendship and alliance, pact-making between humans and tigers, spirits and humans, Hindus and Muslims, in order to ensure non-conflict in this fascinating forest region. And this tradition is still alive today. So in the picture, you can see three spirits of the forest. One is Bon Bibi, the lady of the forest. She is supposed to have come from Arabia. She is on the tiger. Then you have the two male spirits. One is Barakan Ghazi, and the other one is Manik Pir. And Manik Pir is particularly seen as a protector of cows. And Barakan Ghazi is like Bon Bibi, a protector of humans, a protector of the denizens of the forest. And as you can see from this image, I took this photograph from, I myself took the photo just a few days ago from a shrine in the Sundarbans region. You can also see the mazhar, and the mazhar is of Barakan Ghazi. So this is a fantastic example of Indo-Islamic constitutionalism, as well as of human-animal multi-species coexistence and multi-species constitutionalism, where people decide that it's not worth fighting about, it's better to live in friendship. Now, this is a tradition not unique to India. There are examples from other parts of the world. For example, in Europe, one of the most famous examples comes from the 14th century, where there is a pact of peace, what we would say, Maitri Chukti, Shanti Chukti, we would say in Bengali, in Italian, Il Patto della Pace, between a saint, a city, and a wolf, because there's been a wolf who decided to eat people of a city. The city people decided to kill the wolf. And finally, St. Francis of Assisi, he comes and he shakes the paw of the wolf. So it's not a handshake, but a paw shake, and finally creates an alliance so that the city will protect the wolf and the wolf will not kill the people in the city. Now, what all of these traditions show is that before the modern capitalist world came into existence, before its horrors, there were forms of multi-species coexistence in different societies across the world, which limited human greed. Because at the heart of capitalism, at the heart of Pujivad, is low. It's sheer greed. As opposed to that, we might talk about the Upanishads, tena tak tena bhunjita. It's better not to be greedy, but rather through non-greed, through sacrifice, it's better to enjoy things. But many of these ancient traditions, they are very alive in India even today. And I'm sure I would be very interested in the Q&A session if you give me examples from Bhojpur, the Bhojpur region, from Uttar Pradesh, from Bihar. You would know of other traditions. I know the ones from Bengal the best. So this is a photo. I attended a 2-hour-long puja of Dakshin Rai a few days ago. And this is the photo that I took from Dakshin Rai's shrine. So on the left, you see Dakshin Rai with all those weapons. He uses that to protect the people in the forest. And to his right are 3 statues of his best friend, Barakan Ghazi, and they are revered, respected together in the same shrine. Again, an example of human-animal coexistence. And on the right, of course, you see, this is from a local museum in Baruipur, which is a small town in the Sundarbans. There you see also Marx there, a statue of Marx and of Lenin, and a poster of animals. And this is because there was a local socialist activist who also was very much interested in the local cults and worship of the Sundarbans, in all these local gods. So in the same museum, you have statues of both Marx as well as of Bon Bibi and Dakshin Rai and so on. And my argument would be that to understand the history of socialism, of Samaj Tantra in India, it's not only important to understand the Western roots, Marx and so on, but it's also important to understand the indigenous roots of Samaj Tantra. Samaj Tantra has strong indigenous roots. Dr. Jha gave a brilliant talk on that in London. But more broadly, I would say that it's also multi-species Samaj Tantra. It's about Prajati Samaj Tantra as well. Now, if we think in this way, we can perhaps understand a lot of local religion, Laukik Dharma, a lot of local gods, Laukik Devata, a bit better, as offering us resources to think of critique of capitalism. So here is the statue of a shrine, again in the Sundarbans, that I took a few days ago. I've been doing lots of field work in Bengal as well as in Bihar in the last few weeks. So this is a shrine of Devi Shitala. She's the goddess of pox. But as you can see, it's a beautiful shrine because she really is in the middle of that tree, and the tree expands and she's almost enveloped by the tree, but she also comes out in a kind of really divine epiphany out of that tree. So, and if you look at the Rai Mongol tradition now, the reason why trees have been sacred, why sacred groves are worshipped all across India, part of the reason we can see, and the Rai Mongol tradition is very explicit about this, is that it puts checks on human greed. When humans want to go and destroy trees to expand their settlements, if they think that the trees are gods, that they are sacred, it will automatically put some limits on their greed. And there we see in popular subaltern religion, Nimna Vargiya Dharma, Laukik Dharma, a kind of immanent critique of the extraction of value from trees, from deforestation. Now I move into a more kind of standard intellectual history part of my talk, because the question arises, how does a more secular, disenchanted concept of the economy arise in India? Because economy today in Bengali, we translate it as Orthaniti, probably in Hindi as well, you have the term Arthaniti. Arthaniti or Arthashastra did not mean in the pre-colonial period what it means now. If you think about Kautilya's Arthashastra, he actually talks about not just economics, but about state, about morality, about society, about gender, lots of different things. But today, economists tend to ignore local traditions. Most economists today would be saying, no, it's all about GDP and growth and statistics and quantitative data and things like that. How did such a question, how did this secularization of economics happen? And I would say it happened gradually in 19th century India. So if you look at a figure like Keshav Chandra Sen, he's a very famous late 19th century Bengali social religious reformer. He is one of the first people who talks extensively about the economy or the economic as a category. Now, what does he mean by that? He uses economy in a number of senses. If you look at the Greek term, economic comes from two Greek words, oikos and nomos. Oikos means household, the griha, and nomos means law. So we might actually translate it as griha dharm, but nobody translates it as that, but it could be translated as griha dharm or griha ain or something like that. But the way Keshav understands it, he thinks of the British Empire as a household, where Queen Victoria, Maharani Victoria, she's the ruler of that household, and then you have the native princes, the zamindars, and so on, also as heads of the household. So it's a patriarchal model of the family. I mean, Victoria is a woman, but still largely it's a patriarchal family. And this is a top-down family. So he also thinks of every individual household also as being an economy. And then God himself, God the Father, he is very Christian influenced. He thinks about God largely as a father, not as a mother. God also rules the divine family. So it's multiple levels. You have God the Father, you have the Queen Victoria, you have the native princes, the Mindars, etc., and you have then every local family headed by a man. So economy is about the management of the household and top-down management. And we might say that this is a model very different from multi-species constitutionalism or from democracy. It's not a democratic model. It's a top-down authoritarian model. Another person who gives, but he's thinking very much still in imperial terms. A person who gives a more nationalist twist to it would be the Indian nationalists. And Manu Goswami, she's a famous historian, has a fantastic work called Producing India. She deals with how the Indian nationalists subverted this imperial understanding of the economy. And a very important person there is a visual person, is Rabindranath Tagore, the famous artist whom I talked about just a while ago. And this is his famous painting of Bharat Mata as a goddess. And you can see she is almost kind of derived from the Lakshmi ideal. And as you all know, in Indian traditions, Lakshmi, there are many kinds of Lakshmi. There's Griha Lakshmi, there is Rajya Lakshmi, Saubhagya Lakshmi. And the nation herself also becomes a kind of Lakshmi figure. Why? Because the British are creating tremendous crisis in India. They're creating famines, they're creating poverty, they're exploiting Indians. So against that, the nationalists want to think about the nation as an economy, but as a sacred economy, as a divine economy that needs to be protected from the British. And this, of course, will gradually get secularized with the Nehruvian nation state, with Jawaharlal Nehru. The religious imageries will slowly move away, very slowly, from the kind of state gaze, but then you will have other things like economic planning, etc., taking its place. Now, that then leads me to think about how, I mean, if I'm right and the conception of the economy has been very gendered, gender lies at the heart of how the economy is constructed, Then the question arises, what is the role of the gender in capitalism? And some of the people I've been very inspired by are figures like Roswitha Scholz and Veronica Gago, etc., who argue that gender lies at the heart of how economic value, arthik mulya, is constructed. So there's a relation between, I hope gender is translated in Hindi as linga, in Bengali it is. So linga and arthik mulya. So their argument goes that the way that arthik mulya is constructed, the ones who produce arthik mulya, financial value, they are coded as male, as purush, because traditionally it was the men who went to the factories, who were wage laborers, and so on. Those who perform the labor which is unquantified, the work of care, of emotions, of rearing the children, of cooking, of washing the dishes, this is all unpaid work. It's all unpaid value. It's a mulya which does not have an arthik mulya. It's impossible to quantify it. Those who do that work, and life would be impossible without care work, without love, they are coded as female. So there's a very kind of bifurcation happening there. And the problem with capitalism is that it emphasizes the arthik mulya, the financial value, which necessarily in most societies becomes male financial value, over female value. So the value of women are devalued. And this is what Shubhatri Dasgupta is, she's writing a PhD in Cambridge about. She talks about colonial capitalism as unleashing a global crisis of care. So people are having a sense that Samrajyavad, imperialism, is related to the loss of care, of yatna, of prem. So we are living in loveless societies, or societies where love is being destroyed by capitalism and state work and so on. And we can see this in everything from famines to the way patriarchy is not invented, but reinvented by modern capitalism, so on and so forth. And then the question arises that how do we think of value in relation to commodification? And my argument would be there's a strong relation there. And one of the ways in which we can understand this is the problem of dowry. In Bengali, the word for commodity is panya, and the word for dowry is pan. So in a way, in dowry, we see the commodification of women. And this is what the text that you have on the left side of my slide, that's from a text from the Kshatriya Samiti meetings. These were assemblies of the Rajvanshis. The Rajvanshis are the biggest Dalit community in West Bengal. They were one of the most important Dalit communities in colonial India. They were a mostly peasant community living in sub-Himalayan West Bengal. So largely what's today's Jalpaiguri, Kuch Bihar, Rangpur in Bangladesh, and so on. And they identify this Dalit community. They used to hold meetings. And in their meetings, this is a page from one of the minutes of their meetings from, I think, the 1910s or early 20s. They are arguing that we need to criticize the commodification of women, and both dowry as well as bride price, because in many of these communities, often it was the men who paid wealth rather than the other way around. This entails the buying and selling of women, and this should be something that needs to be severely critiqued. And this was part of the broader discourse that we need to bring back care. We need to bring back yatna towards women, towards non-humans, and so on. And my next example precisely shows this. This is again from this Rajvamshi Dalit community.
Milinda, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. We are 5 minutes to, actually 3 minutes to 5.
Oh, I'm really doing bad with time.
Yeah, so I mean, take like another 10 minutes, because usually
I'll take
have a shorter question and answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Apologies for that. I lost track of the time. So the Rajvamshis, basically what they're arguing is we need to care for the non-humans, particularly for the cattle. And I would say this is a major critique of the idea that economy is only about production, about utpadan. Actually, it should also be about care as well. Now, this leads me then to the question that is capitalism then a robbing of being, a robbing of sattva, a de-being, a fact of monster making? In fact, in many societies across the world, the entry of capitalism, of commodification, this has been seen as a process of monster making. In Africa, people often thought that people accumulated wealth by turning others into zombies. Among the Khasis in Northeastern India, people often think that commodification, accumulation of wealth, this entails that it's like a vampirical serpent which drains the life out of beings. Karl Marx only gives a philosophical justification of this when he talks about capital as acting vampire-like. And in capitalism, people lose their souls. The Pujibadis say their soul becomes the soul of capital. Now, I would argue that subaltern community offers the best way to resist this kind of capital. And here is the photograph of Pontanon Verma, who was the most important leader of the Rajbangshis in the early mid-20th century. The Rajbangshis strongly emphasized that it's by acting together as a community that they could resist the capitalist exploitation of them, the loss of land, labor, of zameen, of shram from them. And this would be the way to organize care as well. And this becomes also a way of criticizing Puji. And just very briefly, Puji is the word we use in Bengali today. The Sanskrit word was traditionally Muladhana, but over the 18th to 20th century, the word for capital has also become Puji, which is related to the word for accumulation of Punja. And what I would say is that we need to criticize what Marx calls commodity fetishism. In Bengali, it's called Panya Pautalikata, commodity idolatry. And a very interesting text is the 18th century, a text about Shiva, Rameshwar Bhattacharya's Shivayan, where the goddess Durga, she says that capital, puji, and deceit, pravanchana, are the roots of trade. So it's a very strong critique of capitalism. And in order to critique capital, of course, men and women need to come together. And this example that this photo clearly shows a Rajbangshi man and a woman coming together in the resistance against capital. A very famous Bengali Muslim thinker who has talked about this is Qazi Nazrul Islam. For Qazi Nazrul Islam, labor becomes a fundament of thinking about divinity. So he talks about divinity, God, as being present as an avatar, as present as an incarnation in the working classes among men as well as women. And that's why he draws upon both Hindu as well as Muslim images, particularly is very inspired by both Advaita Vedanta and Sufism, to talk about the fact that what unites us all is that we are laboring beings. And from this standpoint, we need to recognize that we are ourselves divine and not subject to some other master. Because when we think that other people are our masters, we lose ourselves, we become Swahili. And this then becomes a way for him to talk about the revolution. My final example comes from Tripura. I think I'll take about 10 more minutes and I'll be rounded up. Tripura is in northeastern India. And here is a map of Tripura. As you can see, most of what we see as Tripura today is a hilly region, but it borders the plains, the Bengal plains. Tripura's most important textual chronicle is the Rajmala, which is composed roughly between the 16th and early 19th century. Now, why is Tripura so interesting? Because in Tripura, we have a very strong Highlander peasant community who practice shifting cultivation, Jhum. And through this shifting cultivation, they regularly resisted the state. They regularly resisted extractivism by the state, meaning high taxation. And they continued to resist colonial capitalism across the 19th and early 20th century. And the Rajmala gives a beautiful kind of philosophical justification for this. It says, whenever the kings start harming their subjects, Shiva will destroy the king. And this is a statue of the Shiva from Unakoti, which is a very important pilgrimage place in Tripura. James Scott, who is a very famous anthropologist, says that Highlander populations all across northeastern India to Southeast Asia have traditionally resisted state and capital. But the problem with Scott's argument is that he doesn't give enough intellectual history, textual evidence for what he's trying to say. But I think the Rajmala does. And what the Rajmala, as well as what research in the colonial archives in India, in northeastern India shows, is that indigenous populations all across northeast India have regularly resisted state and capital, states and companies who have tried to exploit them. And they have been at the heart of not just anti-colonial rebellion, but also of the development of indigenous socialism. In case of Tripura, Dasharath Verma is Dasharath Dev is a very important figure there. And that then leads me to my final point, which is how do we think about indigenous democracy? Our democracy, our Ganatantra, not the democracy of the Westminster parliamentary system of the Western state, which most Asian and African societies have inherited. In my book, as well as in Yele's book on Nagaland, we talk about indigenous democracy as something that has historically resisted both colonial ruling classes as well as post-colonial ruling classes and capitalists. Now, I'll briefly talk about Nagaland. This is Yele's research, not mine. In Nagaland, traditionally, the Nagas not only have very sophisticated forms of assembly, but they also think that non-humans also have assembly. So they think about their ancestors, tigers, even pythons as having assemblies. Now, why is this assembly form so important in democracy? Because the Nagas, Yele's research shows, frown upon the Westminster style of voting. Because the Westminster or the European style of voting often gives power to the majority. The majority wins, the minority loses. In contrast, in the Naga assemblies, people deliberate for days and days until they can reach a decision. And the idea is that they will choose a person to be a decision maker and so on, who is least unliked by the most, rather than the liked by the most. So in short, everyone, it emphasizes consensus, not conflict. It's a consensual model of assembly making rather than a conflictual making. And I'm really happy that for our volume, we got this amazing painting by Seng Mei. She's an amazing Naga artist representing this multi-species assembly. Bhutan is another place where you have very similar ideas, and Yele has been conducting fieldwork in Bhutan. I also plan to do fieldwork in Bhutan very soon. In Bhutan, it's of course Buddhist norms of dharma, which in Dzongkha is Cho from Tibetan Chos, and the idea of happiness in Pali and Sanskrit text Ananda, Sukha, in Dzongkha Gaki, which are important in ensuring that humans live in non-exploitative relations with non-humans. I mean, I'm not idealizing Bhutan. There is also a lot of, state power, etc. in Bhutan. But among the local people, there are still strong ideas that one should not, for example, kill vultures because vultures are seen as ethical beings because they don't kill anyone, they eat dead bodies. Or one should be kind towards yaks and treat them as family members. One should look up to cranes because they are very monogamous, so they are kind of embodiments of ideal love and so on. And again, we were very fortunate that for our book, we could get a Bhutanese artist, Pema Gyaltshen, to draw this fantastic diagram of the crane dance, where humans imitate cranes because they look upon the cranes as bodhisattvas. And I think I'll need just 2 or 3 more minutes. I guess my point is to draw to a conclusion. We need to provincialize man as a political animal. When we talk in normal political science textbooks or history textbooks, we say man is a political animal. But actually, Aristotle also talked about bees and cranes and ants and wasps as political animals. So did Plato, so did Virgil. And that is because humans have for a long time recognized that non-humans are political actors, not just commodities. In fact, Virgil talks about bees as living under laws, almost like in a democracy or republic. And this is confirmed by modern scientific research. I've been reading a lot of biology articles in the last few weeks. So in a lot of these biology textbooks, it's very clear that animals like bees, ants, a lot of fish, a lot of elephants, etc., indulge in democratic collective decision-making, which means that we should think about animals not just commodities that we can eat in the supermarket, that we can destroy their habitats and replace them with factories, but as active living democracies. In fact, there was a fantastic movie on Arte, a documentary on animal democracy. One of my colleagues in St. Andrews talks about the cultural lives of animals like whales and dolphins. Now, I'll just take 1 more minute. What I want to draw the conclusion is that there is a lot of traditions, subaltern ways of life and intellectual production that we need to think about if we want to create a better multi-species democracy today. At the heart of this should be re-kinning. We should think about non-humans as our kin, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We should emphasize rewilding. This is a big discussion in Europe at the moment about bringing back wild animals, wild plants, and so on. We should think about the world as being animate and not just a world of commodities, a world of, of abstract kind of capitalist modernity and so on. And we need to create multi-species solidarity. So we conclude our book with an example of what we think is, we call a post-colonial yak feminist revolution. Because yaks are, of course, treated, female yaks are milked, sometimes very exploitatively. In Bhutan, male yaks are often castrated. Only one male yak is left uncastrated. A post-colonial yak feminist revolution might want to take the consent of yak women and not overexploit and overmilk them, and also not castrate the men either, but let them live in an empowered plural democracy. And maybe, and there is yak resistance to human behavior. Yaks often kick humans, they often actually engage in collective revolts when humans overexploit them too much. So there is a yak subaltern political consciousness. And perhaps we can think with such things in order to create a better multi-species democracy for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for this very interesting, rich lecture, and every bit of it so rich. So before I open the forum for question and answer, I've just sent a message. Please, if you want to ask a question, you can write it in the chat box, or you can put a X in the comment box so that you can ask your question directly. Before I open the forum, there are some sort of key points that, I mean, from my reading of the lecture, my listening of this thing, I want to congratulate you, not for its sheer brilliance, but the richness of the sources that you're bringing. And also, Milinda, the fascinating is the long duration that you've taken. You've come from the ancient India, you've come from ancient polity, and you talk about the contemporary. And also in terms of reinterpreting, re-engaging with the way we've looked at justice, and coming from the perspective of the non-human species, whether we are talking about the animals or we are talking about Mother Nature, and the examples that you brought from these various texts is absolutely encouraging. The second thing that needs to be congratulated is the universality in which you're drawing. So obviously the point of reference is India, and you're coming from Eastern India. Thank God that Eastern India doesn't stop to Bengal or Assam, but you're bringing experiences from Tripura, you're bringing experience from Bhutan, the lesser known sort of spaces within our world of discourse. So that is something that needs to be commended, along with the fact that you bring narratives from Latin America, you bring narrative from New Zealand, in terms of bringing a certain kind of universality in what you are posing here. And what is interesting from the intellectual history perspective, we are talking about, you know, the need to sort of democratize it, the need to have voices from the margins, what's considered as margin. But the usage of these metaphors and the narratives, the animal metaphors that you bring from the sources against colonialism is absolutely, absolutely fascinating. And I think it will encourage many of us here in the department to look at how the colonial question, the colonial state, as well as the post-colonial state, can be addressed in terms of these narratives, these metaphors. It reminded me of this book that kind of changed my life, Martha Nussbaum's Frontiers of Justice, in which she's, for the first time, you know, somebody had the courage to say that how this whole conception of justice is not just male-centric, but is also human-centric, and therefore the need to open frontiers of justice in a way foregrounding the kind of argument that we have with regard to ecological justice. So that, and just one more point with regard to the indigenous democracy, you know, when you're bringing the narrative of the socialist trajectory, it's very interesting for me, but also at the same time, it becomes very important for us to trace how, you know, meta narratives, meta processes were sort of engaged with, you know, the indigenous lens or the lens of the vernacular. I just have one query, not a question. Milinda, would you be interested in sort of also mapping the other parts of the country. If you would want to go to Maharashtra, because most recently I've been engaging with the writings of women thinkers from Maharashtra. And I also find like a lot of reference to animal-like experiences, which were given to women. If you look at Tarabai Shinde's work, Sri Purush Tulna, there's so many times when the animal metaphor comes in. The animal metaphor comes in very significantly, even in the vernacular writings in Uttar Pradesh. Like I was reading this one particular text that, Milinda is just so moving, Mera Parivar by Mahadevi Verma. And one of my doctoral researchers working on Mahadevi's writing. And that book, in a way, is such an important argument for the kind of argument that you're making about the multi-species justice and democracy, because of the values that she kind of brings with regard to these animal experiences. So I think it would be very interesting for you to look at, the writings from other parts of the country, because it will end up making your larger argument extremely rich and powerful. So thank you so very much for this brilliant lecture. And if anyone has a question, you could raise your hand, you could put a cross and go ahead. Milinda, would you like to say something?
Yes, thank you, Priyanka, Dr. Jha, Priyanka, for that fantastic range of questions. Absolutely. So the other languages that I feel more or less comfortable with is Hindi among the Indian languages, but I've also been looking at Maithili texts. So one of the main text sort of traditions I'm looking at the moment are the Kabir and the Dadu traditions, because Kabir, of course, Samata is very important in the Kabir tradition. It's one of his most inspiring lines, Nari Purush Samatai Ho. We can never know which line exactly Kabir said, but that's not very interesting for me. Interesting for me is how he's remembered and what the tradition says. And the Kabir tradition is full of kind of critiques of violence against animals, particularly kind of against, whether it's animal sacrifice. And here's these moving lines where he says, for having a taste of an animal, you're destroying a life where Brahma shines through. So I think the Kabir tradition and similar kind of subaltern traditions, etc., are very powerful. But I'm also at the moment kind of looking at texts from Jharkhand and Orissa as well. I've also been looking at Maithili texts as well, particularly kind of Jain texts being produced in Maithili and so on, where there's a memory of kind of Vaishali and kind of, but linked to kind of Republican critiques of power and so on. So absolutely. And I think this kind of work, to be honest, needs to be collaborative, because you would have a lot of expertise which I simply can't. And we need to work together with, Uttar Pradesh, with Bihar, with Maharashtra, with Northeastern India. And that's why Yele and I at least with us, we try to combine Bengal, Northeastern India, Bhutan, but I think we need to map it into a much bigger kind of strength, because I think the living power of everyday subaltern democracy, however much it is challenged by state power or capitalism, it's still there. And women play a central role there, because I think in Bengal, in Northeast India, probably across India, it's women who often did a lot of the care work towards animals, towards plants. And that kind of thing needs to be recognized. Of course, it was also enchained by patriarchy. It was the value was extracted from them. But how can we learn from women to create multi-species social reproduction, social justice? And I think there has to be at least a pan-South Asian work, if not bigger. So I hope we can continue this conversation in more collaborative directions. I would really love to do that.
Absolutely. Do anyone have a question? If you don't, then I would want to have a quick chat with Milinda over something which has just become very big right now, the whole emblem that the present state is working towards. But, it's Sarnath, it's right next to us. And if you look at that emblem, the choice of having that as, so there's a lot of writing as to why Nehru chose that as the state emblem. But you see the unison. If you look at the emblem, you see those 4 animals. And if you look at Jataka that you've mentioned, like in Buddhism, that's a very significant idea, because a lot of values that are being sort of invoked, something like ahimsa or truth or dham, not dharma, but dham, is very much drawn from this animal world, from the animal republic.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, sorry. Did you want to say something, Priyanka, more, or?
No, actually, there's a comment, if you would want me to read, Dr. Sarnath has asked, I don't know. Yes, it wants your comment. Do you want me
to read the comment, yeah.
Dr. Banerjee, thank you so much for that wonderful lecture. Prathama Banerjee, in her 2020 monograph, briefly touches upon an exploration of Panchatantra on a textual continuum with the Artha Shastra and the Niti Shastra text, dealing with the Artha Dharma dichotomies and texts on beyond human subject making. I would love if Dr. Banerjee could comment on that.
Perfect. I think Priyanka, your comments and Shagnik's comments dovetail very well together. So I have been reading the Pali text actually. So I've been reading the Jatakas. One of the most fascinating Jatakas talks about the Buddha is very concerned about conflicts between his monks. And so he takes the example of animals and how animals live together. And he uses the term sabha gavityuno. I consulted a Pali expert. It has multiple meanings, but one of the possible meanings is that the animals have a sabha where they collect together. And the Buddha uses that to say that like the animals are living together, that in the Sangha, the monks should live together. Now, he also talks about election among animals in the Jatakas, the word ekachanda, one voice, one elect. It's a voice. Chanda meaning election, voting is actually a terminology that comes from the republics. Now, I think there's a very interesting connection between the ancient republics, like Vaishali, like the Vajji Confederacy, which the Buddha was very deeply aware of, the terms that they used, like Chanda and so on, and the Buddhist Jataka tradition. Because what is really happening is that these republics were full of animal imageries. So I went to the Vaishali Museum, and there some of the biggest collection in the museum are zoomorphic images. They're actually of animal images. Now, the problem with a lot of the 20th century historiography on these republics by K.P. Jaiswal, J.P. Sharma, is that they ignore this non-human dimension. That's not, but actually the animals are really central to the politics that is happening there. In the Panchatantra as well, one of the key terms is samaya. And samaya, we translate it today as time, but in traditional Sanskrit, it can also mean pact or alliance. And it comes from the word sam, with. So with samaya, pact is a term which is used for animals. Now, this also, I think, helps us to answer Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak? Can the subaltern animal speak? Now, in the modern Western tradition, this has been denied to animals. And Descartes has a very famous quote where he says the ancients were wrong. Actually, animals are, they don't have voice, they don't have speech. But if you look at the Rig Veda says Vak, speech, the goddess, she also speaks through animals. Bharata's Natya Shastra, it talks about animal languages. I think the term uses Nana Vihangaja, the bird language, as well as there's a term for wild and domestic animals. In the Islamic tradition as well, I was speaking to a really fascinating Syrian scholar. You have, of course, the influence of the Panchatantra on the Arab world and the Iranian world. And then you have also in the Quran as well, the birds having language. So in the Islamic tradition too, there is a sense that animals have language and so on, which is why Attar, for example, writes his famous work, The Conference of the Birds. So I think ideas about animal speech, animal communication, animal pact making, etc., lie at the heart of many traditions, whether it's the Buddhist, Republican kind of traditions, or these, other Islamic or other traditions. And we need to revisit those seriously as constitutive of intellectual history, because one of the big blind spots of intellectual history in Europe, in India, has been its tremendous anthropocentrism. Animal politics has never been taken seriously in intellectual history. But in India, I don't think we can afford to do that, given that our texts are very obviously about animal politics. So absolutely, I think we need to do that work.
Would you comment on Shagnik's?
Yep. I think I would absolutely link with Shagnik's question that with Prathama Banerjee, absolutely, I would agree that the animals, the kind of going beyond the human subjectivity needs to be taken into account. But I would perhaps differ a bit from Prathama Banerjee in the way that she conceptualizes the political. I think that I would take the animals as more central to polity making than has been done in traditional intellectual history scholarship.
Thank you. Thank you. Rajhans has two questions. Rajhans, I would request you to be brief because we also have Deba Rati's comment. Would you want me to read the comment to you right now so that you could club it with Rajhans's question, or would you want to take it one by one?
I can actually see the comments. So
okay, I was just reading it for the large audience, but good,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see Raj's question. So
okay, so thank you for giving this opportunity. I had two. Okay, so I had two quick questions. First one is that how far it is appropriate to say that we should, it is Capitalocene when Marxist and socialist philosophies also is not averse to the materialistic philosophy. And the second question is actually this multi-species concept of democracy reminds me of one book called Animal Farm by George Orwell, and the second film that I have seen a few years back, The Rise of the Kingdom of Apes. So, I mean, in humanity, as we call in human civilization, the democracy is not. Democracy is a product of a certain revolution and movements carried out by human beings. So we don't see any kind of movement by animal per se, and even if it is, even if you are going for multi-species democracies, are you saying that humans should act more responsibility in its treatments to ecology and environment, or are you suggesting that there should be absolute equality as we see in the book Animal Farm or the Kingdom of Apes? Thank you.
Could I answer that question? And then I can also answer Debarati Ganguly's question as well. Thank you very much, Raj, for that. I'll really concentrate more perhaps on the second part of your question, because I mean, with Marxism and materialism issues, there are so many kinds of Marxisms that, we can have more pro-indigenous Marxisms and more Eurocentric Marxisms. We can have more anthropocentric Marxisms and less ones. So, it depends on which kind of Marxism that one is looking at. But going to your second question, I think, so with Animal Farm as well as with the Planet of the Apes, my slight kind of anxiety is that in these texts and movies, animals are largely used as metaphors. I mean, and I think that's kind of like a bad faith where humans use animals as allegory, but I'm not sure that necessarily that comes from any deep kind of biological ethnographic knowledge. Now, the question you raised that democracy comes from revolution, I think that what a lot of biologists would, I mean, I've been, reading biologists now. I mean, last time I studied biology was in school, but I think a lot of what a lot of biologists are showing in their scientific work is that actually most decision-making in a lot of species in the animal world, among ants, bees, fish, elephants, horses, cattle, etc., happens democratically. So what does that basically mean? It means that when animals have to take decisions, for example, where do you make your next nest? Where do you make a hive? Who do you make your leader? Where do you go for food and shelter? These are decisions where actually animals organize collectively and the majority decision wins. Often there are things like quorum. Often there are processes of assembly making where the swarm would divide. They would find out different kinds of beehives, food shelter locations, and then whichever one is better, they would collectively decide in that way. If they can't come to an agreement, the pack will divide up. And that's what a lot of the scientific research, which I cited, like, on the honeybee democracy or the animal democracy documentary, and many, many other essays over the last 20 years or 15, 20 years has been showing. So I wouldn't, to my mind, I wouldn't think of democracy as necessarily hinged to the revolution model that we have inherited from France and America. Because an alternative way of thinking of democracy would be like what the ancient Greeks thought, democracy as ontology. Now, this, of course, begs the question about equality. Is there a relation between democracy and equality? Ancient Greek democracy, of course, we know its problems. Women, slaves did not have equal rights. Even in the ancient republican assemblies, women normally, as far as we know, did not take a part, which is why Ananda had to ask the Buddha, why can't the women be part of the assembly? And then the Buddha finally agrees to form the Sangha and induct the women in. It was so inspiring in Vaishali to see that first female assembly. I've been reading the Therigatha, and the Therigatha is really also amazing because I would say it is a female assembly, but it is not formed through revolution. It's formed through care work, where women come together. It's not this muscular revolutionary model. It's a model of care, of mutual dependence, where women come together, often women from very bad family conditions and so on, and give each other shelter. And I think that's perhaps more something that resonates with animal democracy. It's perhaps a model of care, of mutual interdependence, rather than necessarily of revolution in the way we understand it. And then I come to the question of Debarati. So she asked, is there any relevance of the animal vahanas attached to various gods, even if the vahanas are unique in terms of their own qualities? Absolutely. And if I'm being a bit cheeky, I would say, think about the relation between Krishna and Arjuna. Now, Krishna is the charioteer, but is he inferior to Arjuna? Of course not. The charioteer and the one who is on the chariot, they drive together. And similarly, I think the Vahana is absolutely essential to understanding who the rider is. So think about Indra and Airavat. Now, why is the elephant associated with the king? Because the elephants also have their very large-scale polities. Often, actually, it's a matriarchy. Often the women elephants are very important, and the yutha is very important. So it's a model of human-animal kind of interdependence or divine animal interdependence. In Bhutan, yaks, gods are often supposed to possess the yak. So you worship yaks and thereby worship the god as well. So I think a lot of traditional, for want of a better word, animism is not a good word because it comes with a lot of baggage. But if we use it for a moment, a lot of traditional human reverence for animals was probably channelized in these religions into the idea of the Vahana. But by, in a way, emphasizing the autonomy of the Vahana's consciousness, perhaps we can do the work of animism drawing on subaltern traditions as very clear from the case of the relation between Bom Bibi or Barakan Ghazi and the tiger. The tiger there is the god and the god is the tiger. So there is a kind of dialectical identity as well.
Thank you, Milinda. There was a hand that was raised by Sarbani. Okay. So thank you so very much. Before I invite Professor Shubha Rao for the formal vote of thanks, I would like to, on behalf of the department, like to thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for taking time out of your field visit. Dr. Banerjee is on his field visit to India, and we would have really liked him to come in person and do this lecture, but we're still struggling with COVID challenges. And hopefully when we have better situation and condition, we would love to have you in the department to speak to our students and encourage them to think radically the way you've done for this lecture, to think radically about what is considered, as the mainstream. Kisle has raised his hand, but I'm afraid that, we are already, this is 5:30, and I would actually ask Professor Rao if we should have this question. Can we allow this question, Shubha ma'am?
Which question? Which question is that?
Kisle has just raised his hand and we are already 5:30.
It just shows the popularity and how has been. So please carry on. So okay. Take this as the last question.
Okay, we'll take this as the last question.
From Uchia Glen.
Itachi, do you have a Krishna? You can ask your question, and Itachi is also saying something, but we will allow Itachi only after Krishna has asked his question. Krishna, please keep your question brief. Thank you.
Where am I?
Should I read out Kisela's question? I can see it on the chat. Because Kisela seems to be muted. I'll just read out Kisela's question. It's a fantastic question. It's really brilliant. Are today's environmental movements able to concern themselves with the idea of multi-species world, or are they only concerned with saving the environment for the interests of humans? I think it's a really central question. I think a lot of human interest in the environment, at least in the West or among elites I think a lot of environmentalism.
1 second, Milind, we want to listen to your response. Can the host please mute Itachi? Thank you. Milinda, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a lot of environmentalism in the West, as well as in places like India and others, at least with kind of elite activism, is indeed about protecting the environment for their own selfish or self-interest, and not for the non-humans per se. And that is where I think we humanities scholars have a big role to play. Because what we humanities scholars have the right and duty and responsibility to say is that the environment is not an abstraction. The environment is not just a thing out there which needs to be protected for the welfare of humans. The environment is actually a collection of beings, and each of these beings have different ways of living and communicating and so on. And a lot of multi-species kind of ethnography, including, for example, on the relation between trees and fungi by Merlin Sheldrake, I mentioned Van Duren and others, are precisely shown that we live in a multi-species world, and we need to think about how we can use different traditions from across the world to care for the non-human beings for their own self. So to use the Buddha's words, Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. But the Bahujan is not just the human Bahujan, but also the non-human. The Buddhist texts always say, the Lalita Vistara particularly, that the law of Dharma, Dharma Chakra, the wheel of Dharma, it moves to respond to the Ruta, to the cries of all beings. So we have to respond, I think, to the Ruta, the cries of all beings, and not just this abstraction called the environment.
Thank you so much. This is a very pertinent response. I would now request Professor Shubha Rao to formally close the lecture.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Priyanka. Dr. Milinda Banerjee, it was an out of the world, I must say, a lecture, an experience, and a listening. And it was, I mean, too good for any comments. It has shaken many of our assumptions, our well-founded beliefs, our trainings as political science students. And I was constantly getting reminded of that very famous adage from Aristotle, that man is a political animal, and if one does not live in a state, he's either a god or a beast. So I was just thinking that why the Greek philosopher said this, and the way you have included the entire being, the beingness of the very life. You have in a way included the entire life in the cosmos, in the world. So what comes to my mind, that being caring and being respectful towards animals is one thing, and making the human beings, getting them identified with animals is another thing, because one thing that divides, the dividing line between the two, is that of language. The way human beings have language, the animals don't. At least this is what my understanding up till now says. Although you have challenged many of our understandings, and you have you have shaken them to the roots, I must admit. And the second thing is that, as Marx has also said, that human beings, man is a tool-making animal, and the greatest difference between human beings and non-human beings is that the animals keep on repeating their skills. They are repetitive. Even for 100 years, the bird's nest remains the same in its designing and its the way it is made. But human beings evolve. Their capacity to labor, their capacity to work evolves with time, and that's why from the Stone Age or from the Cave Age, we have traveled to the Jet Age, to the artificial intelligence age. And so all these things, these just kept on flooding in my mind. And but it's rightly being said by Priyanka that it was your brilliant lecture that challenged all these ideas in us and evoked all these ideas in us. So I think it needs a series of lectures and a series of conversations and dialogue between a brilliant speaker like you and we as political science students to come to some kind of a conclusion or an agreement. So a very excellently thought-provoking lecture. Thank you very, very much for this lecture. Thank you, Dr. Banerjee.
Thank you so much. So
thank you very much, everyone.
We would close it, and thank you. With a bad, I just want to tell the audience that Dr. Banerjee is recovering from COVID and he has a throat infection. But despite that, he did not, postpone the lecture and still managed to take time out of his busy schedule to be with us. Thank you so very much. Thank you,
everyone. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice weekend, everyone. Thank you. Bye.